Welcome to Coffee and Conversation, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. With me, I have a author and writer, Jack Buckby, this evening. And Jack is a writer and researcher from the United Kingdom and a research associate for the Frontier Center for Public Policy. His latest book, Monster of Their Own Making, describes his experience as a young working-class man in Northern England when he became active in Britain's biggest white nationalist party. He describes how young men were compelled to join the ranks of extremists off the back of legitimate grievances relating to immigration, the economy, and social pressure. His most recent research paper also analyzed how politicians of all stripes have used the COVID pandemic to advance extremist policy agendas. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on.
So, Monster of Their Own Making. I described it slightly there a little bit for you. For a little bit of our listening audience and our live viewership, can you explain a little bit what prompted you to write the book?
Yeah, so first thing to say is that I'm not ashamed to say that I consider myself largely a conservative person. Well, it's quite common for people who leave the far right to join the ranks of the far left, and that's something I haven't done, and it's something I will never do. And so I wrote this book because I felt like I don't think I'm one of a kind. I don't think I'm a rarity, but I think a lot of people who get wrapped up in genuinely extreme politics and who later leave it do find themselves sitting on the sort of conservative end of the political spectrum. And right. I think that's a natural sort of position to find yourself in. When you're young, for many different reasons, as I'm sure we can talk about, you can find yourself in these extremist movements. And oftentimes it's a sort of exaggerated version of who you really are. And so it makes sense that if you're joining the ranks of the far right, that maybe that's something my politics teacher told me when I was 17 years old. He said, "Jack, you're a conservative," and he was right. And what I recognized and what I saw is that I think it's extremely damaging to make it appear as though the only path out of radicalism is to join radicalism on the other side or join extremism on the other side. And I felt like that wasn't being talked about very much. And so the premise of the book, Monster of Their Own Making, is that people, particularly in the United Kingdom, but also in the United States, are being motivated to join the ranks of extremists off the back of social pressure from far-left extremists, from neglect by the politicians, and from smear campaigns from the mainstream media.
Gotcha. Now, and that's something here in the U.S., I'm not exactly sure how it is in the U.K. I know it's some bit has their issues there too, but here in the United States, as you can tell, we are extremely divided. If you are in the least bit conservative, they automatically clump you with the far right.
Right.
And like you said, just because you're conservative doesn't mean that you're racist,
right,
or that you have any of those ideologies. Now, how has it been being a very publicly outspoken conservative after leaving the far right? Have you still gotten lumped into that whole, just because you're conservative, you're a racist? So
yeah, it doesn't stop. And what you find is, the reaction is different on both sides. There's people who are in the conservative movement who don't really understand what I'm saying. They think, "Oh, are you leftist? Are you like a hardcore socialist?" And the thing is about me, when I say I'm a conservative, I'm a European conservative. I'm left-leaning in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certainly not fully compliant with the sort of Republican Party platform in any way. So, I have people who consider themselves conservatives and Republicans in the US who think, "Well, aren't you just a leftist?" And no, I don't think I am. And then I have leftists in the US and the UK who say, "Well, you're just still a Nazi." Because, if you haven't joined the ranks of the left, then you're just the same person, aren't you? And that's just, it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it suggests that if you ever become wrapped up in an extremist movement, and there's lots of reasons why you might do that.
Mm-hmm.
For me, For me, it was the economy. It was, 2008 was the economic crash. My hometown was being affected by large-scale immigration, particularly from Poland. So it wasn't even so much a race issue; it was an economic issue. And then as we've talked about before, you can find the extremism later on. It suggests to these young lads who join these movements out of youthful naivety that their only way out of it is to join the ranks of some pretty terrifying left-wing extremists who caused around $2 billion worth of damage in the violent riots last year, which is somehow ignored.
Right.
Or you shut up and just disappear, or you die, frankly, because a lot of these people don't think we deserve to live. And I just think that's so wrong. If there is a large contingent of young people who find themselves in the rank of extremists because it's an exaggerated sort of embodiment of who they are, then we need to give them a way out. Because if you don't give them a way out, then what's the point? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to make life as difficult as possible so that people are forced to join the ranks of the left?
And if nothing else, it will. And you hit the nail on the head. Also, it's like you said, it's like a exaggerated form, but it's also, you mentioned in your bio there, I mentioned how some of it was legitimate grievances,
right,
or grievances in general that were being addressed by the extremist movement that were not being addressed in your non-radicalized and non-extremist movements, which then drew you in. And I know that's how it is today too. And I know I've had Tom Ravlick on here, and we've talked about how the media also plays into pushing people to extremes.
Yes.
100%. What would be your take on that? I mean, we've talked before, and I know we definitely agree on a lot of the things, but for the listening audience, like, how do you perceive that the media can push it, whether it's to the right or to the left? Because it can push it either way, typically one way or the other.
As I say, I think it's a three-pronged attack. The media has a big part to play, but the politicians have a big part to play in this too. So in the United Kingdom, at the time when I was about 15, 2008, we had the economic crash, we had large-scale immigration. Any talk of immigration was completely off the table. You could not talk about it. If you did talk about it, you were a racist. And it just so happened that the communities that were hit the hardest by it, the communities that saw the biggest changes, it wasn't just towns like mine, which were hit by the economic damage, where we had young Polish lads, many of whom I knew, many of whom I was friends with, my family were friends with, and they were excellent. I've got not a bad word to say about the Polish. They're excellent. But there were towns nearby that were hit in a different way. They were hit in a cultural way. Their streets changed. There were social cohesion problems and so on. And when you can't talk about those problems, and there's only one movement that is talking about it, you bet people are going to join that party or join that movement. And I think things got slightly better once Brexit happened, once we left the European Union. Finally, people had that chance to say, hey, listen, we're not happy with the direction this country's in. We would like to leave the European Union. We've been saying so for many years. And we finally got that referendum and we won. And it gave people a sense of empowerment, particularly working class people, because it was working class people that won Brexit, frankly. And that gave us a sense of empowerment. Then what followed was a 4-year bitter battle by the politicians to stop Brexit from happening, which put us back in our place, which was, frankly, I don't think the politicians realized how dangerous that was and what they risked doing. If they had ultimately ended Brexit and stopped it from happening, then we would have had a way bigger problem on our hands than we did with the British National Party that I joined and became active in from 2008 onwards. We would have had a way bigger problem. Thankfully, Boris Johnson delivered Brexit in a fairly good way. And so I think things might have improved. And again, in the UK, for a long time, the media was dead against working class people, had no interest in representing our interests, particularly on issues like immigration. You had a couple of newspapers that would talk about things occasionally, the Daily Mail and so on. But you still had huge sections of the working class voters who were demonized, particularly if they'd happened to join a political party or a political movement that was deemed racist when really it was just addressing issues that politicians didn't want to address.
Right.
And things have got better. We now have GB News, which is a mainstream media outlet in the UK. It's a rolling news channel that talks about these issues. So I think things have gotten better in the UK. Not perfect, but better.
Which is all you can really strive for, because nothing is ever going to be perfect. Nobody's ever going to be fully satisfied with every single thing that's going on. But if you're able to at least strive to better, then it's improvement.
Right. So if you have a media that's willing to listen, or at least mainstream media outlets that are willing to listen and represent your views, that's one tick off that three-pronged box I was talking about. That's one tick gone. If you then have politicians who are willing to listen, and we sort of have that with the Conservative Party, it's not the most conservative party you'll ever find, but it is representing working class issues a bit better than the Labour Party is at the moment. So if they can keep that up, there's another tick gone. The third tick is you have to stop this relentless push from far left extremists who will stop at nothing until everybody complies with the, for want of a better word, woke agenda. That's dangerous. I'm all about making people, empowering people, ensuring that communities are represented and so on. But when you have an agenda that's so virulently anti-white, that frankly is only going to aid the white supremacy that you think you're fighting. If you think it's bad now, wait until a few years down the line when you've done nothing but relentlessly trash white people, and particularly young white straight men. Just wait and see what's going to happen, because you're playing with fireworks. It's dangerous. And in the United States, what I see, sadly, is things not getting better, but worse. My biggest concern, sorry, this is a long answer, but my biggest...
No, you're good. Keep going.
That the 2020 election, and I get why people don't like Trump. I get it. People don't like big characters. People don't like, I don't know, egotists and whatever. Personally, I have some disagreements with him, but I would have voted for him if I was an American. But what I saw in the 2020 election was what's the word I'm looking for here? The emboldening and the confirmation that violence works. What we saw in 2020 was that perhaps the biggest wide-scale riots in modern or recent American history that for some reason has been ignored. We saw entire black business districts, black-owned business districts, burned down by activists who claimed that they were representing the interests of black people in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and in cities all across the United States, hundreds of cities, $2 billion in damage, committed by left-wing extremists. No other word for it, extremists. Right. And that was either ignored by the politicians, and when they did talk about it, they played it down, and the media talked about it, sort of, occasionally. As CNN said, it was fiery but mostly peaceful.
I was just going to say that, mostly fiery but mostly peaceful. Like, it's...
But then contrast that with the reaction to the January 6th riot, which was equally contemptible, not equal in terms of damage, not equal in terms of length, not equal in terms of participation, equally contemptible, however. Right. But compare the reaction. Look at what Nancy Pelosi is doing with her partisan commission in the House of Representatives, which contains only members of Congress who are virulently anti-Trump. It doesn't matter that she got a couple of anti-Trump Republicans on it. Does not make it a bipartisan committee.
Right.
The way they're talking about Republicans, not just the people that attended this riot, not just the frankly idiots that attended it, but the way they're talking about Republicans as a whole, as if they support a violent insurrection, which I'll tell you, most Republicans do not support.
No, not at all.
Again, this is poking and stoking the fire. This is not good for community cohesion. It's not good for bipartisanship. And if you want to continue down this path of demonizing and attacking Republicans, conservatives, and as we've seen, frankly, again, young, white, straight men, you're not going to get the result you think you get. And it's my fear that maybe if they keep making this mistake, if they keep stoking this fire, if they keep attacking people in this way, and they don't realize yet that they're the ones pushing people to extremes. That's not to say people don't have their own free will and so on. But there are reasons why people join these movements, and extremism doesn't come from a void. It happens for a reason. Right. If they haven't realized yet that stoking these fires is causing the problem that they complain about, then I'm pretty terrified that people so stupid have been elected to represent the people. But I'm increasingly becoming to the realization that maybe they know what they're doing. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's why they're doing it.
It's a very, very difficult thing to sit back and watch. And unfortunately, given both of our histories, we say anything about it and suddenly we're racist again. And it's like, right. No, it has absolutely nothing to do with the racism. It has everything to do with giving legitimacy to certain grievances that otherwise would not. Like, not, and I've told this to people before, it's like, you scream that this is wrong. You scream and it is, and you scream that you want change and you want people to change, yet people such as you, they leave that because they don't agree with the racism and everything else, but they're still of the conservative mindset. But because they have not flipped to the other extreme, are not accepted. And it's like, oh, well, you're still a Nazi.
Right. You know, I've seen people online. They saw something I'd written, and they said, oh, this guy's just a Nazi, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody commented back saying, well, actually, here's this counter-extremism work that he does now. And they go, good. I hope he's giving back to his community. What's he doing for the LGBT community? What's he doing for this, that, and the other? It's like, oh, I see. Right. Okay. So unless I meet all of your list of demands, I'm never redeemable.
Yep.
Even if I joined the ranks of the far left, I'll never be redeemable unless I continually capitulate to every single demand that they have. And, you know, that leads me to think as well that a lot of these people maybe don't believe in what they say all of the time. It seems to me that a lot of people on the far left, and this is the same way with the people on the far right, are part of these sick communities where they're constantly trying to one-up one another to make themselves feel powerful. But more than anything, it gives them a sense of being a part of a community, being part of something. I find that it's some of, this might sound rude, but I think it's true. Some of the most profoundly uninteresting people are members of these extremist organizations. And I don't think that's because they're inherently bad people or inherently uninteresting. I think it's people with extreme, what's the word? An extreme lack of self-confidence, put it that way. People with their own internal struggles. And I don't laugh at that because I've been there. And it's easily one of the reasons why people join these movements. There are others. And in order to make themselves feel better, they put other people down. They become part of these wider communities. They feel like they're part of something big. And that's not healthy for anybody.
No. And it becomes more like a cult-like mentality. When you don't realize that going into it. I know I get so frustrated. I actually turn like the news and I turn Twitter off, which I have coined twatter because it just, because people, everything isn't always a black and white issue. There isn't a one answer fits all. You know, because if that was the case, then, you know, everything that this woke thing has and the extremes have, then it would make it, if it was very simple and you could paint everything with a broad brush, then we wouldn't be sitting here having these conversations.
Right.
You know, Cobra Dad was saying, pride comes into play big time. That's why the far right and the far left are so extreme.
I think this pride is a big part of it. I've seen people on the far right who I've always deemed the cranks. And again, it's not a matter of trying to be rude. It's a matter of trying to cope and deal with some of these people. But what they were individuals who wanted to be leaders of something. And so Every week you would see in the UK a new movement appeared. And sometimes they weren't even far right. Sometimes they were like counter-jihadist movements or something like that. They were nothing to do with race or white supremacy or anything like that. But it kind of feeds into that sort of radicalism. You would have the UK freedom movement or freedom for UK. And, you know, it's like that old Monty Python joke. Oh, damn. I'm even forgetting it myself. Sorry, it's been a long day. But the People's Front of Judea and the Judean People's Front, that's the one.
Yes.
You have all these organizations that keep reappearing with new leaders, different people who have so much pride and so much sort of, well, it looks like a self-confidence, but really I think it's a lack of self-confidence because they want to be, you know, the leader. They want people to follow them. And it's sad more than anything. And yeah, I've seen this on the left greatly. The parallels are pretty astonishing. I've seen it on both sides.
It really is. Like the old joke used to be, you know, you go so far left, you go right, or go so far right and you go left, because it's literally two sides of the same coin. Like,
right. That's something I said in the book, and this isn't my own theory. This is a fairly well-known theory. The horseshoe theory is that the far left and the far right meet in the middle, and of course they do. And I forget my point now, but yeah, it's called the horseshoe theory. The far right and the far left meet in the middle, and it's very common. And you know, ever since I've come out, ever since I've been trying to talk about ways that we can counter extremism by simply addressing grievances rather than ignoring them, I've been met by some of the most vile, extreme people who describe themselves as CVE, countering violent extremism activists. And it makes me sad that this is the kind of discussion we're having. The kind of people, you know, I've met some fantastic people too, but I've met some people who have left these movements on the right where they all want to be leaders, and they've joined this CVE movement, which is pretty much 95% left-wing activists.
Right.
And they're not understanding. They're not willing to consider the possibility that young men might have legitimate grievances. And I've seen some who accept that young men in working class communities might have legitimate grievances, but they say that those grievances were really just about capitalism. Give me a break.
Right.
I'm from a socialist town. I'm from an old mining town. I'm from an old anti-Thatcher town that hates the woman for closing the mines. But that town wouldn't function without capitalism because we wouldn't have any jobs. It's not as simple as that. The UK in particular is not really a socialist nation. It's not really a capitalist nation. We're a mixed economy and have been for a very long time. We have legitimate grievances relating to social issues, relating to social pressure from political activists, relating to just the way we live our lives and how that might change with a massive influx of people. And it's not always a matter of hatred, but over time it can become a matter of hatred when these legitimate grievances are ignored. And it concerns me greatly that people in this CVE movement are often so willing to dismiss people like me because what? Because I'm a conservative, because maybe I say some mean things about far left extremists, or maybe because I'm willing to consider the possibility that a lot of people who left the far right are still extremists. They just happen to become left wing.
Right. And people on far right, far left, the way they talk about the other direction is with the same. Oh, yep. Cobra Dad was also saying that he's friends with people of the far right and far left. The way they talk about the other direction is this with the same hate, if you will, as the other. Yeah. Like they preach don't hate, don't hate, don't hate, yet they spew hatred. Much like, and like you said, you know, since you've decided to speak out against these things, I mean, you could have just been like, you know what, I'm just going to keep my own thoughts and opinions and the way that I think that we can help prevent or counter extremism to myself. And you would have probably went on your merry way. You'd still have some hateful things just because, unfortunately, that's how people are sometimes. But you wouldn't have near the pushback that you have now. Like, did that ever, I'm sure you do. I know other people that do too. Like, you don't just get it from the far left, you get it from the far right too, because not only you're speaking out against both extremes.
Right. Yeah, I still get it to this day. The I'm a secret Jew, I'm a race traitor, all that kind of stuff. And again, it's from people who don't really have an accurate assessment of who I am. The people on the far right think that I've become some far left lunatic, but the people on the far left think that I'm still some kind of neo-Nazi. The thing is, there's nuance to everything.
Yes.
As I explain in the book, I was a part of a white nationalist movement. I was friends with neo-Nazis. I knew people who are now in prison for trying to murder our local member of parliament and various other crimes. I was in that movement. Was I ever a neo-Nazi? No. And I wouldn't say I was. Did I use racist slurs? Yep. Did I become increasingly extreme during my teenage years? Yes. But I was never a neo-Nazi. I never actually, that's the thing, I never actually said a thing about Judaism. I never got into the anti-Jew stuff. But I did get led down the pretty extreme racist stuff. And so there's a nuance to everything that I think is really important to understand. And actually that plays into the whole point about understanding really what's going on with young men. You can't paint things as black and white. You can't look at someone, oh, you're a member of a neo-Nazi organization, you're irredeemable, or you must completely convert to the opposite end of the spectrum, and so on. There is so much nuance to this. And I don't think people are willing to talk about that. I don't want to sound like I'm trying to make excuses for what I might have done or said, because I'm absolutely not, and I'm extremely upfront about everything I've done and said. But unless we're willing to accept that there are nuances, that things aren't as black and white. Put it this way. I was a member of the BNP, the British National Party, and at the same time, traveling across Europe for concerts and art shows put on by pretty left-wing activists. I used to go to Yoko Ono concerts. I love Yoko Ono, one of my favorite artists, but I used to go to Yoko Ono concerts in Europe with friends I had from all over the world who were mostly gay fellas.
I was going to say that's definitely not conservative, Yoko Ono. No,
not in the slightest. So I was this weird hodgepodge. I didn't know what I was thinking or doing, but people find themselves in this movement. And if I'm out there going to these left-wing liberal art exhibits across Europe, and at the same time coming home and being a member of the BNP, which was a white nationalist movement, what do you think the chances are that I'm just a hardcore neo-Nazi that just hates everyone who isn't white? Do you think maybe there's a possibility that the reason I joined that political party in the first place was because I had legitimate grievances and concerns that affected people in my hometown? What's a more sensible answer?
Yeah. Well, that's how I got involved, was because of a lot of it was the push from the far left. And it's insane. It's really insane because I hope
you can still hear me okay. I just had to put a fan on because it's getting quite hot.
You're good. Okay, yeah, good. We can hear you still. You're good. Was a lot from the hatred coming from the left, then pushed me to the right.
Right.
And then I went down several different rabbit holes that I never in my life would have thought I would have went down.
Right.
Because you get into it and you're like, well, I agree with this portion of it. Like you said, the economics of it, they're addressing that grievance. And a lot of people here in the US that were a part of the group that I was, they were addressing the illegal immigration. So that drew a lot of people in. They might not have agreed with the racism and all of that. But unfortunately, because of the cult-like mentality, you wind up going down that rabbit hole without even realizing it until it's too late a lot of times.
Something I heard so much last year from people who've never said anything political in their lives. And what they told me and what they said to me by multiple people who have previously never had anything to say, not just about politics, but about anybody of a different race, of a different culture, a different background. They saw what happened with Black Lives Matter, not just in the US, but it happened in England and in Europe too. And they told me, Black Lives Matter is making me racist. And that's something we should take really bloody seriously. I heard that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't people saying, I woke up today and I hate black people. That's people seeing a movement that's condemning white people, teaching this idea of critical race theory that all white people are inherently racist. And do you think that's going to win people over? Do you think that's going to make white people feel better about your movement? If your entire political narrative is based on the idea that white people are terrible, well, first off, why are you in a white majority nation if it's so terrible? Because clearly it's not. Just look at what's happening in Afghanistan right now with the Taliban. If you want an example of what it's like to live in a non-Western nation, look at that. Look at what happens to young girls who haven't even hit puberty, who are being snatched and taken as sex slaves. If you want to talk about a nation that discriminates against people based on race and so on, you should be looking beyond the West. But then to conflate what's happening in the West with the kind of horrors you see elsewhere, you're taking a society that is fundamentally equal, that considers all people to have the same value, and that, yes, has some people who don't believe that, but for the most part they do, and you go out and riot and condemn the majority population of these countries, you're not going to make people want to maintain peaceful community relations. If it's not peaceful already because you're making it violent, then people are going to ask themselves, why should we tiptoe around you?
Right. I agree. Universal discourse, and I think I'll let you answer this first, and I can answer it too. But she says, what justifies endorsing or supporting racism because of grievances?
What justifies it? Well,
is there any justification for it?
It's not a matter of justifying it. If you think that it's, well, how can you justify what you did? Okay, well, how about what people did to me? How about what people did to my town? How about politicians who for years ignored the concerns that we had, who put a non-native, put it this way, the reason why we had economic trouble in my hometown is because we had immigration into the region where people were using legal loopholes through the European Union to work for less than minimum wage. And it led to families in my town not being able to work, not making ends meet, and struggling. What justified the politicians to do that? The problem is, it's not a matter of justification for racism. Nothing justifies saying and doing things that are terrible and unfair to anybody. But what do you expect to happen when you put people in that position? When people are left with no other option? When you back people into a corner, things don't become about rationale and justification. It's exactly. What can I do to survive? And when you find that the only option you have, the only outlet you have, happens to be a political party that has a past that is neo-Nazi, violent, white supremacists, and so on, that might be your only choice. And for me, it was. To be fair with me, there was a level of naivety. I was 15 years old. I didn't remember the 1980s. I didn't remember what the National Front, which was the precursor to the BNP, was doing back then. It didn't mean much to me because I didn't live through it. I didn't really understand it and fully see it. So if there is any justification, perhaps that's part of it. But for those who knew about it and went there anyway, the fact that they were willing to go there, 1 million people in the UK voted for that party. The fact that they were willing to go there suggests that something was deeply wrong. So I don't think it's about justification for why could you do something racist. It's a justification from the politicians and the media that how the hell could you demonize and pressure people and smear people so much and for so long that they joined a neo-Nazi political party just to make their voices heard.
Very true. Like I agree. There is no justification for endorsing or supporting racism because of grievances. Grievances may explain why somebody may or may not have joined, but that still doesn't justify it, doesn't make it right or anything of the sort.
No.
The
But
biggest
at the
point,
same time, do we, just because there's no justification, do we consider these people irredeemable?
No, absolutely not. I mean, and Cobra Dad even said it earlier. He said everyone is redeemable.
Yeah.
Like we think about murderers that are in prison right now, and everybody, a lot of people will give them more of a chance to redeem themselves than, say, a former neo-Nazi or a former racist.
That sounds at face value like a really extreme comment, but I think it's true.
Oh, I've seen it firsthand, sadly enough. I have seen it firsthand where somebody was more willing to give a convicted murderer a second chance, but would not give a former Nazi a second chance.
You know, there's a problem with that as well, because when there's no redemption, there's no reason to leave.
Exactly.
And when there's no reason to leave, you're just going to go further down that rabbit hole. It's never going to get better. You either get worse and worse and worse, or you kill yourself. The young men I knew are either in prison, dead, or have just disappeared and gone quiet. And God knows, frankly, what they're doing now. And I hope it's nothing more sinister.
Right. When you refuse to allow somebody the chance, at least, to redeem themselves, or the chance to go on a positive path, then, like you said, you're giving them why should somebody leave? Why should somebody say, you know what, I don't want to be a part of this extremism and this hate anymore? Because they're going to hate me and they're going to tell me that I'm still a Nazi.
Yeah.
Even if I leave.
Right.
And instead, we should be, I think people get hung up way too much on the, what's the term I'm looking for? We get hung up on the has-beens,
mm-hmm.
and not our what can be.
Yeah.
And there are people that have said that they have changed, that by their actions you can tell that they have not.
Yeah.
But what about the ones that truly do change, such as yourself? And we've been asked before, I know Jeff Scoop was on here before, and he's mentioned that he's been asked before how, well, if I leave, do I have to become a communist or a socialist?
Right.
Do I have to flip to the far left?
Uh-huh.
And the answer is no. You can be more conservative. You can be more liberal. You can be more centrist, or you can lean more to one way or the other. That's politics. That politics don't just determine your humanity.
No, not at all. And think about it. If you as a young person, or not even necessarily a young person, frankly, I talk about young people a lot because that's what I've seen. But of course, it can happen to anyone at any age. But if you find yourself leaning towards these extremist movements on the right that are perhaps not just against immigration, but want to permanently remove all non-white people, who want to exterminate non-white people, who have these conspiracy theories against Jews and so on, that's an exaggerated version of a restrictive immigration policy or a tight immigration policy. It's an exaggerated version of that. So doesn't it seem natural that if you sort of turn that down, find yourself and become more reasonable, doesn't it make sense that those people would fit more into the sort of conservative side of things? It's a way simpler transition than it is than jumping to the other side. If you have the only people willing to talk about how can we get you out of this movement and how can we give you a better life, for instance, like the counter-extremist organizations in the UK that work for the UK government, and they're preventing young people from becoming terrorists. If the only option for them is to talk to someone who is a socialist or a communist or a Marxist or whatever, that's not going to make them want to leave. And it's also going to reaffirm any conspiracy theories they might have about a global agenda that wants to silence all people on the right and so on. You need a variety of different voices. And it needs to be clear to anybody who wants to leave these movements that your future is open. You don't have to move to this completely different worldview. You don't have to pretend to be someone else. You can have your concerns, you can have your voice, but it doesn't have to be this extreme voice. Because actually sometimes as well, another reason why people find themselves in these extreme movements is because sometimes saying and doing radical things is the only way to be heard. And that's something I've done too. I did it a lot when I was younger. Even after I left the BNP and I was in the counter-jihad world and I was campaigning against Islamic extremism and so on, I would use shock tactics on purpose to be heard, because it was the only way to get in the newspapers, the only way to get on the TV and make your voice heard. Right. I think that says a lot about the media, the fact that they're desperate for people like that, but nonetheless, it happens. If we can show people that there is a future for them, that they don't have to either be silent or completely change their views, they can have a voice without resorting to extremism or hyper-partisan sensationalism, that's a good thing. And the only way we can do that is by having people reach out to these young people, or anybody really, from a variety of perspectives.
Absolutely. And Jeff just messaged on Twitter and said, great conversation, Jack and Acacia. If you have not covered Jack's book, please ask him from me to let the audience know where to go and get it. I personally think it's an important book for people to read.
Thank you, Jeff. It's so it's called Monster of Their Own Making, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Simon & Schuster, all that kind of stuff. It's on my Twitter. If you just do Jack Buckby, JackBuckby on Twitter, it's all in my header and stuff like that. Cool. It's been a little while since I wrote it, and things have changed since then. I wish I could update it, but sadly you can't with paper. But you know, the events of the last year, I think, kind of prove some of the points that I make in the book.
So does that mean you'll be coming out with another book?
I've written too many. It's too much effort for too little reward. I don't know. Maybe in the future.
Maybe in the future. Maybe you and Jeff can team up on one or something.
That'll make it easier.
I was going to mention also, because we have, I have discussed on here media a lot. I've had Tom Ravlick. If you don't know who he is, he's a journalist from Australia. Very good. But I saw your article on the Post-Millennial about PayPal and ADL's plan to deplatform conservatives will not result in less hate. Can you give a little brief overview of that? I'll put that in the comments also for people to take a look at. Definitely check it out.
Yeah, I have a few concerns about that. So the PayPal and the ADL are going to be working together, and the plan is to monitor the cash flow of extremist organizations. Now, it's important. We've got to see how these organizations are funded and so on. But if they're looking to find out if they're being funded in or using PayPal in any way different than any other organization, then I think they're going to be disappointed, because what they're going to find is that they receive donations, they spend the money. It's as simple as that. I think there's something a little bit more sinister behind this, given the ADL's broad definition of extremist. It's quite common for conservatives to be lumped into these categories. And so I'm concerned that what's going to happen is, given PayPal's history of deplatforming people who I would probably think are pretty abhorrent, if I'm honest with you, some of the people they've booted, but I don't think they deserve to be booted from having their own online financial platform, because that's just like booting someone from a brick and mortar bank in 1980. It's not a minor inconvenience anymore. Right. It's not there. No matter how abhorrent someone is, we can't just be, sidelining people and pushing them out of normal society. It's not right.
That's how you create extremists.
Well, yeah, like if you leave people with nowhere to go, then they ain't going to get any better. And I expressed some other concerns in the piece about whether or not booting these people from the platform is actually a good idea. Because if you boot them from the platform, then you can't monitor them. If you want to monitor these organizations, you should be wanting to let them use these platforms and see where it's coming from, and maybe use that to identify trends, to see why people might be getting involved with them and so on. But just this sort of caveman approach, and I call it a whack-a-mole approach. There's an extremist, get them, bang. There's an extremist, get them, bang. You can't just keep doing that, because when you whack them, they're not disappearing, they're going underground, and you'll never find them again. It's
Exactly.
a ridiculous approach. And so what's concerning me about this PayPal ADL thing is not only the broad definition of extremism, but the fact that what they find is going to be shared with people in Washington. And when it's shared with people in Washington, I know that it's going to become this huge thing in the House of Representatives, in some committee with some Senate hearing or so on, about, look at this far-right threat, look at these far-right organizations that are recruiting online, what are we going to do about it? Well, first off, maybe we should address the grievances and why those people exist in the first place. But secondly, if we're going to address those, we need to address the left-wing organizations that are recruiting online and taking in millions of dollars from various organizations all over the world to fund what are literally violent riots that result in arson, that have resulted in businesses and homes and lives being destroyed. If we're going to have an investigation into this, whether it's the funding through PayPal and the ADL, or if we're going to have an investigation into what happened on January 6th and why that happened, we need an investigation across the board. And it can't be about trying to demonize people. We can't just be trying to demonize people on the left. We should try and understand why they're in that place. We can't just be demonizing people on the right. We have to understand it. It cannot be partisan in any way.
I could not have said that better myself. Absolutely. Because it's right. You know, if you're going to apply one set of standards to one side, it needs to be applied across the board.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it needs to be. Otherwise, we are going to push people to extremes one way or the other.
When people have nothing to lose, they're
the most dangerous.
The most dangerous.
That's what I try to tell people. We were talking, I don't know if you're familiar with it, the National Socialist Network down in Australia. We're just found out about some stuff. And so many people are probably going to be losing their jobs and their livelihoods. And, you know, if they're doing violent things, I think there is a proper way to do that, and it should be addressed.
Well, a legal way.
Exactly.
You address it through the law.
Exactly.
If you have people that are perhaps tied up in this movement or in the early stages and so on, I don't think blasting their names all over the media or so on, or publicizing it and making a big old stink about it is actually the best way to do it. Because once you destroy these people's lives, they may never recover, and they may just sink further down into that hole.
Right. And you are now giving legitimacy to grievances that might not otherwise had any legitimacy to them. Because now they can say, look, see, we told you they were coming for us.
Yeah.
Which then pushes people further in. And I thank you very much for your time tonight. I know it's getting late, but I would love to have you on again sometime. Maybe you and Jeff can come on and we can have a powwow or just have another coffee and conversation. But I appreciate it. And everybody, the book is Monster of Their Own Making, and it is available on Amazon. I did put there it is on the screen again. And Jack Buckby, thank you again, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.